Welcome to Lifestyles of the Not Jet Set. Today we're in Boston, Massachusetts, a wonderful city for a history and travel and tourism show. I think about Boston's connection to the history of the American Revolution and the history of public causes, like its central role in the movement for the abolition of slavery, or its connection to labor history. And right here, as I stand on Long Wharf, I'm thinking about Boston's connections to the history of commercial trade and shipping. Boston, in the age of sail from the 17th century all the way up through the 19th century, was one of the central locations right here on Long Wharf for commerce that connected the United States to Europe and to China and to countries around the world. But at the same time, this very same location is connected to more modern forms of transportation. Right behind me across Boston Harbor is Logan Airport. Now, usually in a travel and tourism show, there's some uncomfortable things that we don't pay so much attention to, such as the climate impact of the travel that we do. But here today, we can think with Logan Airport behind us about the heavy level of greenhouse gas emissions and how sometimes it's invisible. In Boston's greenhouse gas reporting and goal setting, there's a graph on the city's website that sort of communicates a certain amount of pleasure in the rapid decline of greenhouse gases. But this rapid decline requires ignoring some key things. The accounts that go behind this chart have to ignore Logan Airport, because if we paid attention to Logan Airport, the greenhouse gas emissions would be much higher. Recently, I looked on the greenhouse gas report, the environmental report for Logan Airport, and they acknowledge a certain amount of emissions amounting to 0.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. You can see that 0.5 million metric tons added to this chart from the Boston city government would make a modest difference. But I wish that modest difference were all that I had to tell you about. Regretfully, the story is worse still than that, because all of the official accounting for greenhouse gas emissions from aviation typically pays attention only to emissions up to 3,000 feet of altitude. 3,000 feet, meaning that they're paying attention, for example, to particulate matter that causes asthma, right? For that, the important thing is what gets emitted up to 3,000 feet. But for aviation's climate impact, it's almost dishonest to count only the emissions up to 3,000 feet. The logical, coherent way of accounting greenhouse gas emissions is to count all of the emissions that correspond to the flights that take off from Logan Airport. It's a fair way to do it, because you think about many planes come into Logan, many planes take off from Logan. We don't want to attribute to Logan all the emissions from all of those, but what's fair is to count just half of them. Each airport sells most of the fossil fuel, the jet fuel, the kerosene, that's used in the flights that are departing. And if we add up the greenhouse gas emissions that correspond to that amount of jet fuel, we see that the amount is so massive that it would greatly affect Boston's chart about what is our total city greenhouse gas emissions. When we take into consideration, honestly, the consequences of our flying, we start to imagine a different way of conducting business and a different way of powering the transport that gives us so much pleasure and brings us so much joy in our travel and recreation. As I stand here on Long Wharf, you can see around me the slightly unusual feature for this video of the sea level rise. Now, it happens to be on this day in October 2024, a king tide, atypically high tide over the course of the month. But there's about another foot of the sea level rise that I'm standing in that's attributable to human fossil fuel-induced climate change over the course of the last 100 years. And there's going to be about another foot. Imagine where that rides up to my knee on over the course of the next 30 years, and then another foot beyond that by the year 2100. And that's only if we don't make any further mistakes and increase our greenhouse gas emissions further. So as you think about the ways that we enjoy life and travel and even history tourism, we could reflect on what are we willing to entertain in terms of new ways of doing things and new ways of doing business that fit our sense of ethics and that fit the times that we live in and what we can really see around us if we're paying attention to the real view.